The rain in Charleston didn't fall in sheets that week. It drifted, soft, stubborn, impatient, like the city itself was trying not to disturb the dead. Naomi Reed stood beneath the black canopy outside Emmanuel Grace Memorial, her hands folded so tightly the knuckles looked pale against her brown skin. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry except the thin gold chain her father once fixed with his own careful fingers. The air smelled like wet oak and lilies, and every sound arrived muffled, as if grief had wrapped the world in velvet. Her father's casket rested a few feet away, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. Leonard Reed had spent most of his life making himself small, a quiet man, a night man, the kind who wiped fingerprints off glass and emptied trash bins after the city's important people went home. To Charleston, he had been invisible. To Naomi, he had been gravity. People came in respectful waves, teachers from her school, neighbors from the old block, a few church ladies with soft eyes and firm hugs. They spoke in gentle sentences that tried to be helpful and still sounded like distance. Naomi thanked them anyway. She nodded. She breathed. She did what daughters do when the world insists the funeral must continue, even if the heart wants to stop time. And then she saw him. Graham Whitaker stepped out of a black sedan like the rain had been arranged for his entrance. Tall, cleanly dressed, a white American face made for boardrooms, sharp jaw, careful hair, the kind of man who looked composed even when he was wrong. He did not rush. He did not look for Naomi first. He looked at the crowd, the cameras across the street, the line of cars. A quick scan, a quick calculation. Naomi's chest tightened, not from surprise, she knew he would come, but from the particular loneliness of being married to someone who could turn every moment into optics. He walked to her side and stopped at the exact distance that looked supportive to strangers. Close enough for photographs, far enough that no one would mistake it for tenderness. "Naomi," he said, voice low, as if grief required whispering. His hand hovered at her elbow, a gesture he did not complete, a kindness he did not spend. She turned her face toward him. His eyes were dry. Not cruel, exactly, just absent, like he had already left the room in his mind and was only waiting for his body to follow. "My condolences," he added, as if he were speaking to a client. For a second, Naomi couldn't breathe. She remembered her father's hands, rough from work, warm from effort. She remembered the way Leonard used to bring her tea at the kitchen table and say, "Baby, you don't owe anyone your softness." She remembered Graham's vows too, the day he promised to be her home. Now he stood beside her like a stranger, borrowing her sorrow for a better image. The minister began to speak. The rain ticked softly against umbrellas. Somewhere behind them, someone's phone camera clicked. Quick, hungry, quiet. Charleston did that. It dressed gossip in pearls and called it tradition. Naomi kept her eyes on the casket. If she looked at Graham too long, she might break the thin, polished surface she'd managed to hold together since Tuesday. When the hymn rose, Graham leaned closer, not to comfort her, but to place a sentence in her ear like a sealed envelope. "We'll talk Monday," he murmured. "There are things we need to handle." Her heartbeat stumbled. The words were calm, but the threat inside them was unmistakable. Not now, not here, not in front of her father. Naomi's fingers tightened around the gold chain at her throat. She didn't answer him. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply stood, still, dignified, while something cold and sharp settled in her bones. Because grief, she realized, was not the only thing burying her this week. And if you've ever watched someone turn love into a ledger, you already know what that feels like. So tell me in the comments, what was the first sign you ignored that you wish you hadn't? If this story is pulling at something in you, tap like so more women find it, and follow the channel, because what happens next isn't healing in silence. It's truth on record. Naomi looked down at the polished wood one last time and whispered, not to Graham, not to the crowd, but to her father. "Stay with me, just a little longer. The rain kept falling, and beside her, her husband stood perfectly still, like a man waiting for the world to forget he was ever supposed to be kind. Monday arrived with the kind of sunlight that felt almost offensive. Charleston's streets dried quickly after the rain, as if the city believed morning was only permitted for a weekend. The azaleas along the iron fences looked too bright. The harbor wind carried salt and morning traffic, and the distant laughter of tourists who had no idea a woman's life could be splitting open behind a quiet front door. Naomi Reed stood in her kitchen with a mug of tea she hadn't tasted. The house was still full of funeral flowers, white lilies, pale roses, arranged like apologies from people who didn't know what to do with grief, except decorate it. Her father's framed photo sat on the counter, his expression calm, almost amused, as if he were watching her with the same steady patience he'd carried through every hard season. She had slept in fragments. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the casket again. Every time she opened them, she saw Graham standing beside her like a man performing decency. At 9:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not a friendly chime, not a neighbor checking in. A single press, clean, decisive, like someone delivering a message they expected would land. Naomi wiped her palms on her skirt and opened the door. A man in a navy suit stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope as if it were nothing. He introduced himself with professional politeness, the kind that keeps your pain from touching him. "Ms. Reed?" he asked, though he already knew. She nodded. "I'm here to serve you." The words dropped into the air between them like a stone into still water. Naomi felt her breath catch, not from surprise, Graham's whisper at the funeral had been a warning, but from the cruelty of timing. As if her grief had been penciled into his calendar, and he had decided it was convenient to interrupt it. She took the envelope with two hands. It was heavier than paper should be. Inside, the first page was bolded at the top, "Complaint for divorce." Her eyes moved down the lines, tracking the legal language the way a person traces a crack in a wall, slowly, unwilling to believe the structure is failing. Irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Request for equitable distribution. Petition for temporary orders. Then she saw it. The sentence that turned the room colder than the air conditioning ever could. Allegations of financial irregularities and misuse of marital funds. Naomi stared at the words until they blurred. She read them again, then again, as if repetition might make them kinder. But there was nothing kind about being named a suspect in your own life. The serviceman cleared his throat softly. "You'll find the court date and instructions inside. You've been served." When she didn't speak, he offered a small, practiced nod and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with sunlight on her face and a shadow inside her chest. Naomi closed the door. The house felt too quiet. Quiet the way a sanctuary feels after the congregation leaves, when the echoes hang in the air like unanswered prayers. She walked to the dining table and laid the papers down with care, as if sudden movement might shatter something. Her phone sat nearby. No missed calls, no explanation, no text from Graham that said, "I'm sorry, I panicked," or "We need to talk like adults." Nothing. That was how he did things. He removed feeling from the process and called it maturity. She forced herself to keep reading. The complaint described her as if she were a risk, someone who had accessed accounts, authorized transfers, acted beyond agreed boundaries. It referenced her father's death in a way that made her stomach turn, suggesting that recent changes in finances required immediate review, as if her grief had triggered an audit. As if her father's funeral had been an opportunity for her to steal. Naomi's hands began to tremble, not because she was guilty, but because she understood the shape of the trap. Accusations like this were not only about divorce, they were about leverage, about forcing settlement, about making a woman so busy defending her character that she forgot to fight for her future. Her mind reached backward instinctively, searching for the last time Graham had asked about money with too casual curiosity. The evening 2 months ago, when he'd leaned against the counter with that half smile and said, "Your dad's still doing his night shifts?" The way he'd phrased it, like a joke, like an affectionate dig, when it had really been a measurement. The week before the funeral, when Graham had asked for her signature on some routine paperwork, sliding the documents across the kitchen table as if they were grocery coupons. Naomi had been exhausted, pregnant nausea flickering in her throat, and she'd signed without reading closely, trusting the man who had promised to protect her. Now the complaint mentioned an authorization dated the same week. A paper cut, small, clean, designed to sting later when infection had time to spread. Naomi lowered herself into the chair. The baby shifted inside her, an almost imperceptible flutter, like a quiet reminder that she was not allowed to fall apart for long. She pressed a palm to her belly and tried to breathe through the tightness. Her eyes landed again on the accusation. Misuse of marital funds. It wasn't just an insult. It was a narrative he wanted on record. Because in Charleston, stories mattered. They traveled faster than facts. A woman could lose her reputation before she ever got a chance to speak. Naomi picked up her phone and scrolled to Graham's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She imagined his voice, calm, controlled, slightly bored. She imagined him saying, "This isn't personal, Naomi. It's just procedure." She imagined him framing her confusion as hysteria. She didn't call. Instead, she opened her notes app and typed the date and time, 9:12 a.m., served. Then, allegations, financial irregularities. Then, do not speak to him without counsel. The steadiness of the act surprised her. It felt like placing a chair under herself before she collapsed. She stood and walked to the counter where her father's photo sat. Leonard Reed's eyes looked gentle, but there was a strength under the gentleness that had always made Naomi feel safe. As a child, she used to think her father could fix anything. Broken sinks, broken hearts, broken days. Now, for the first time, she wondered what else he had fixed without telling her. What he might have prepared without announcing it. Men like Leonard didn't brag. They built quietly. They planned in silence. They left steadiness behind them like a trail. Naomi touched the frame with her fingertips. "I don't know what he's doing," she whispered, not sure if she meant Graham or the world. Her gaze returned to the papers on the table. The language was cold, official, a weapon dressed as paperwork. But she saw something else now, under the legal phrasing and the bolded accusations. Fear, because Graham hadn't filed first to be free. He had filed first to control the story. And Naomi, still raw with grief, still carrying life inside her, felt the first hard click of a truth setting into place. This was not the end of her marriage. This was the beginning of his plan. She gathered the documents into a neat stack, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it beside her keys like an object she would return, unopened, to the person who had tried to use it against her. Then she walked to the sink and rinsed her untouched tea down the drain, watching the dark liquid swirl away. Outside, the city kept shining. The world kept moving. Inside Naomi's chest, something shifted, quietly, decisively, into a new shape. Not rage, not revenge, readiness. By Friday, Charleston had returned to its preferred rhythm. Polite smiles, slow mornings, history preserved like a perfume people pretended not to notice. The city did not ask if Naomi Reed was surviving. It simply assumed she would do it quietly. The courthouse documents sat in her kitchen drawer like a splinter she could not remove. She had read them so many times the sentences felt memorized, the way a person memorizes a threat to stop being surprised by it. Still, every time she pictured Graham's name above the allegations, her stomach tightened as if her body understood betrayal before her mind finished translating it. Naomi had not told many people. Grief already drew attention. Scandal would devour it. She tried to keep her days structured, answer emails for the nonprofit, check in with a few parents from the school she still volunteered at, fold baby clothes she hadn't chosen with joy yet. She drank ginger tea. She attended one prenatal appointment and listened to the heartbeat like it was a promise the world couldn't break. And then the reveal found her the way these things always did, through someone else's phone. She was in the hallway of the community center when her colleague, Mrs. Davenport, approached with the careful expression people wear when they are about to deliver a truth they didn't ask to know. "Naomi, sweetheart," the older woman said softly. Are you sitting down?" Naomi's fingers tightened around the clipboard she was holding. "What is it?" Mrs. Davenport hesitated, then held up her screen. "I thought you should see this before someone else shows it to you." On the screen was a photograph so bright it looked staged. A waterfront terrace, white tablecloths, crystal glasses catching the sun like small, sharp stars. And in the center, Graham Whitaker, smiling, hand placed possessively at the waist of a woman Naomi had never seen in their home. The caption beneath the photo read like a punch dressed in celebration. "Congratulations to Graham Whitaker and Isla Mercer, married today in a private ceremony." Naomi's eyes moved across the image with a strange calm, the way a person watches a car accident in slow motion because the mind refuses to accept the speed of impact. Graham looked effortless in a pale suit, as if marriage were a jacket he could replace whenever the season changed. The woman, Isla, was stunning in the kind of deliberate way that suggested planning in practice. Her hair fell in glossy waves. Her smile was wide, clean, and perfectly timed for cameras. She leaned into Graham's shoulder like she belonged there, like she had always been meant to stand where Naomi once stood. The ring on Isla's hand caught the sunlight and threw it back at the lens. A sound left Naomi's throat, small, involuntary, almost laugh-like, but it carried no humor. It was the sound of disbelief meeting proof. They're married?" she whispered, though the screen had already answered her. Mrs. Davenport's face softened with helpless sympathy. "It's all over the society pages. People are sharing it." Naomi stared again at the date. Friday. 4 days after the funeral. 3 days after the papers were served. He hadn't waited for the ink to dry. He hadn't even waited for the soil on her father's grave to settle. Something cold traveled up Naomi's spine. Not rage, not yet. Something older. A quiet recognition that the man she married did not experience love the way she did. Love to him had always been conditional, transactional, useful. She handed the phone back gently, as if it might burn her skin, and walked toward the bathroom. Her legs moved on instinct. Her body knew it needed privacy before the world witnessed the moment she cracked. Inside the restroom, she locked the stall door and pressed a hand to her mouth. Her reflection in the metal latch looked pale. Her eyes were too bright, as if the tears had been waiting for permission. The baby shifted, a soft roll in her abdomen, life insisting, stubbornly, on its presence even when her heart wanted to disappear. Naomi put a palm over her belly and forced a slow breath. Graham had not simply left her. He had replaced her. Publicly, quickly, with celebration. The humiliation wasn't only personal, it was social. Charleston was a city that loved a tidy story, and Graham had already written his. Grieving husband forced into difficult decisions, heroic executive moving forward, radiant new bride. Naomi could see it forming like a headline. Widow's daughter loses husband after financial questions. He remarries. Her stomach turned. She stepped out of the stall, splashed water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror until the shaking in her hands steadied. She saw the woman Graham assumed would fold, pregnant, grieving, accused. A woman who would avoid eye contact at church and decline invitations and quietly sign whatever settlement he placed in front of her just to make the pain stop. Naomi dried her hands slowly. Then she walked back into the hallway as if nothing had happened, as if the photograph hadn't just rearranged her world. That, too, was a kind of power, refusing to perform collapse for the people who were watching. But the reveal continued to follow her that day, blooming in whispers. At the grocery store, 2 women near the flowers glanced at her and fell silent when she approached. At a red light, she noticed a man in the adjacent car staring a little too long, recognition flickering across his face like curiosity. Even the barista at the cafe hesitated before saying her name, as if she had suddenly become delicate in a way grief hadn't made her. Naomi went home before sunset. Her house smelled like lilies that were beginning to die. She set her bag down, sat at the edge of the sofa, and finally opened her phone. She typed Isla Mercer's name into a search bar with a trembling thumb, the way a person touches a bruise to confirm it hurts. A cascade of images appeared. Isla at campaign galas, Isla with brand executives, Isla in front of step and repeat backdrops, Isla speaking into microphones with practiced ease. In every photograph, she looked like a woman who understood what the world rewarded: beauty, proximity to power, and the illusion of certainty. Then Naomi found it, a post from Isla's own account, a close-up of two champagne flutes, a caption written like a promise. New chapter, new last name, new life. Naomi swallowed hard. She scrolled to the next image. Isla and Graham kissing, the ring visible, the boat dock behind them like a postcard. Comments flooded the post. Congratulations, heart emojis, women calling her iconic, men calling Graham lucky. Naomi's fingers went numb around the phone. There was no mention of the divorce filing, no mention of the accusations, no mention of a pregnant wife at home, still learning how to breathe after burying her father. The world was applauding a story that had not included her as a person, only as a shadow that made their romance look brighter. A tear slipped down Naomi's cheek, quiet and hot. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, angry at herself for offering even that much to the room. She set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one. Somewhere in the city, people were dressing for dinner, laughing softly, beginning their weekend. And somewhere, Graham Whitaker was celebrating the speed of his escape. Naomi rested her forehead against the cool glass and let the truth settle without romanticizing it. He hadn't remarried because he was happy. He had remarried because he believed he was untouchable. And that belief, more than the photograph, more than the ring, more than the champagne, was what finally sharpened Naomi's grief into something else. A quiet, careful resolve. Because if Graham wanted Charleston to watch, then Naomi would not beg for privacy. She would prepare for witness. The knock came on Saturday, just after noon. 3 measured taps that sounded less like a visitor and more like a message. Naomi had spent the morning moving through her home as if it belonged to someone else. She watered the plants her father had once teased her for overloving. She folded a blanket that still carried a faint scent of his aftershave from the day he sat on her couch and watched an old game show, laughing quietly at jokes he pretended weren't funny. She had not slept well. Not since the papers, not since the photo, not since she realized Graham was building a story around her name and inviting the city to believe it. When she opened the door, the man standing on her porch did not look like Charleston gossip. He did not carry flowers. He did not wear the softness of condolence. He was in his late 50s, tall, precise, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like intention. His hair was silver at the temples. His posture, straight in a way that suggested military discipline or an education that never allowed slouching. A leather portfolio sat beneath his arm, and in his other hand was a small, matte black case, too plain to be expensive, too solid to be ordinary. "Miss Naomi Reed?" he asked, voice calm, professional. Naomi's heartbeat tightened. "Yes." He offered a card first, as if respect mattered here. The card was simple: Malcolm Voss, trustee and forensic accounting counsel. A second line listed an office downtown, the kind of building Naomi had driven past without ever imagining her life would enter. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. The words sounded real, not rehearsed. "May I come in?" Naomi hesitated. Grief teaches you to distrust unexpected kindness. But the man's eyes held no hunger for drama, no curiosity, only purpose. She stepped aside. Inside, Malcolm took in the house with a quick, quiet glance. Nothing invasive, just orientation. His gaze paused for a beat at the framed photograph of Leonard Reed on the console table. The smallest change came over his face, something like respect. "He was a good man," Malcolm said, softer now, "and a careful one." Naomi's throat tightened. "Did you know my father?" "In more ways than one," Malcolm replied. He set the black case on the dining table as if he were placing something sacred. Then he unlatched it. Naomi expected documents, maybe a will. Instead, inside was a smaller object, a worn brass key tied to a strip of faded blue cloth, and beside it another key, sleek, modern, with an engraved number. 2 keys, 2 eras. Naomi stared, unease rising like water. What is this? Malcolm didn't answer immediately. He opened his portfolio and slid a single paper toward her first, an authorization letter on thick, formal stock, bearing Leonard Reed's signature and a notary stamp. This grants me permission to speak with you, he said, and to transfer certain items into your custody today. Naomi looked at the signature. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable, steady, slightly slanted, the letters shaped like someone who took time with everything. Her fingers hovered over the page. Why would he? Because he anticipated this week, Malcolm said gently. Not the funeral, but what would happen after. Naomi's stomach turned, as if the house had shifted on its foundation. You mean Graham? Malcolm's eyes lifted to hers, direct, calm. I mean the kind of man who thinks paperwork is a weapon. Naomi's breath caught. She had not told him anything about the complaint, about the accusations. Yet he spoke like he had seen the shape of it before it arrived. Malcolm opened a second folder and placed it beside the first. It held photocopies of filings Naomi recognized by their headings and case numbers. Her case number, the complaint, the allegations. Her blood ran cold. How do you have that? It became available through public record once filed, he said, and your father instructed me explicitly to monitor any legal actions involving you. Naomi sat down slowly, the chair catching her weight as if the room expected her to fall. My father was a school custodian, she said, the sentence coming out like a defense she had repeated her whole life. He worked nights. Malcolm's expression did not change, but his voice softened in a way that felt almost like apology. Miss Reed, he said, your father was never just maintenance. The words hung between them. Naomi stared at him, waiting for the cruelty that often follows a revelation, waiting for the laugh, the twist, the pity. None came. Instead, Malcolm slid another document forward. This one had a seal embossed at the bottom and a name at the top Naomi did not recognize. Harbor and Keene Financial Group. Beneath it were numbers so large Naomi's mind refused to hold them at first. Share percentages, voting rights, trust structures, distributions. Leonard Reed, Malcolm said, held a controlling interest in Harbor and Keene through a silent holding trust. He has held it for decades. Naomi blinked. That's a firm downtown. I've seen their name on the building. Yes, Malcolm replied, and he helped build it, quietly, strategically. He never wanted his wealth to become your identity. He wanted your character to be your inheritance. Naomi's hands began to shake, not from greed, from disorientation, from the feeling of realizing you have been living in a house with secret rooms. That's not possible, she whispered. My father fixed leaks. He changed light bulbs. He also read financial journals after midnight, Malcolm said, a faint warmth in his tone. He taught himself markets the way some men teach themselves scripture. He invested early. He partnered carefully. He protected his stake fiercely. Naomi swallowed hard, the room narrowing. Why didn't he tell me? Malcolm's gaze moved again to Leonard's photograph. Because he watched what money did to people, he said. He watched it make them loud, careless, and cruel. He wanted you to be free of that, free to choose love without calculating it. A sharp pain flickered through Naomi at the word love, like a bruise pressed too soon. And yet, Malcolm continued, he also knew the world does not treat a black woman with softness when she is presumed powerless. He built safeguards, layers. He created distance between you and the people who would try to take from you. Naomi looked down at the papers again. A trust, a controlling interest, a trustee. The language felt unreal, like a story about someone else. Her father, Leonard, who wore worn work boots and brought her leftover cornbread from church dinners, had been sitting on a fortune without ever letting it sit on him. Her eyes burned. So all this time, he was a wealthy man, Malcolm said, who chose to live as if he wasn't. And he left everything structured to protect you, not spoil you. Naomi pressed a hand to her belly, grounding herself in something that did not lie. The baby moved faintly, as if responding to her touch. Malcolm slid the black case closer. "There is more," he said quietly. "But first you need to understand what your husband is doing." Naomi's jaw tightened. "He's trying to bury me." Malcolm's eyes sharpened slightly. "He's trying to force you to sign away what you don't yet know you have." A silence fell, thick, heavy, intimate. Naomi stared at the keys again. 2 keys, 2 worlds, the life she thought she had, and the one her father had hidden inside it like a shield. Her voice came out small. "What do they open?" Malcolm's hand rested lightly on the case, respectful, as if he were touching something that belonged to Leonard still. "A safe deposit box," he said, "and a private file vault." Naomi's throat tightened. "What's inside?" Malcolm met her gaze with a steadiness that felt like the first real handhold she'd had all week. "The truth," he said, "and the tools your father left so no one could rewrite it." Naomi drew in a slow breath, tasting something new beneath the grief. Not comfort, clarity. Outside, the afternoon sun burned bright on the quiet Charleston street. Inside, Naomi Reed sat at her dining table with 2 keys, a trustee's calm, and a father she suddenly realized had been protecting her long before she ever knew she needed saving. And for the first time since Tuesday, the world did not feel like it was closing in. It felt like it was opening. Malcolm Voss did not speak like a man trying to impress her. He spoke like a man trying to keep her alive. He waited until Naomi's breathing steadied, until the tremor in her fingers eased, until she could look at the documents without flinching, as though paper itself had become an enemy. Only then did he open his portfolio again and lay the contents out across her dining table in deliberate order, 1 page at a time, as if arrangement could turn chaos into something navigable. "Your husband's strategy," he began, "relies on 2 assumptions." Naomi lifted her eyes. Her voice was quiet. "That I'm too shocked to fight and too ashamed to ask for help." Malcolm's mouth tightened in something like approval. "Exactly. And that you don't understand the architecture your father built." He slid a single page toward her. At the top was a title in clean, legal font. "Reed Family Irrevocable Trust, Summary of Terms." Underneath, dates, clauses, names. Naomi's gaze caught on one line. Successor beneficiary, Naomi Elise Reed. A strange ache formed behind her ribs. Her father's care had been so thorough, it felt like another kind of presence, one that did not require him to be alive to protect her. "This trust," Malcolm said, tapping the page lightly, "holds the controlling shares in Harbor and Keene Financial Group and several affiliated entities. Your father structured it so the wealth was never technically in his personal name, not in a way that could be easily traced or exploited." Naomi's throat tightened. "Why would anyone exploit it? We lived in a modest house. Because people with appetite," Malcolm interrupted gently, "do not need proof of your wealth to smell the possibility of it." He opened another folder. "This is the second layer. A new page. Springing durable power of attorney. Activation certificate." "You may have heard of power of attorney," Malcolm said. "This one is springing. It activates upon a specific event, your father's death, and it grants the trustee authority to manage, protect, and, when necessary, restrict access to trust-related accounts." Naomi stared at the line that listed Malcolm's name. "So you can lock things?" "I can prevent unauthorized withdrawals, halt suspicious transfers, and require dual approval on key movements," Malcolm said. "But the point is not control. The point is defense." Naomi's hands curled against her stomach, as if her body needed somewhere to place the anxiety. "And Graham?" she asked. "Where does he fit into this?" Malcolm's eyes sharpened. not with anger, but with clarity. He reached for the divorce complaint she'd been served and turned it so Naomi could see the highlighted passages. "He is trying to pull you into a narrative," Malcolm said. "One where you are unstable, untrustworthy, financially reckless. That gives him leverage in two places: settlement terms and custody arrangements." Naomi went still. The baby shifted faintly, a gentle reminder that the future had a heartbeat. "He wants my child," she said, the words tasting unfamiliar in her mouth. "Not because he wants to be a father, because he wants a bargaining chip." Malcolm nodded once. "And he wants speed. He served you immediately after the funeral because he knows grief slows the mind. He wants you to sign quickly. He wants you to agree to temporary orders that become permanent through fatigue." Naomi looked down at the papers, suddenly seeing the trap's shape more clearly. The court date, the request for temporary support arrangements, the suggestion that she had already misused funds. "Is there any truth to his accusation?" she asked, though the indignation in her eyes made the answer unnecessary. Malcolm didn't flinch. "That depends," he said carefully, "on what you signed last week." Naomi's stomach dropped. The memory returned in sharp detail. Graham at the kitchen table, sliding documents toward her with practiced softness. "Routine," he'd said, "just some housekeeping." Naomi had been nauseated, exhausted, distracted by calls about her father's condition. She had signed because he was her husband. Malcolm placed a new sheet in front of her, a copy of a one-page authorization form bearing Naomi's name, her signature at the bottom. Naomi stared at it until her vision narrowed. "That is my signature," she whispered, "but I don't remember this." "Because you didn't read it carefully," Malcolm said quietly, not judging, simply naming the truth. "And because it was designed to look harmless." He pointed to the center of the page. "This authorizes a transfer from a marital account into a vendor account. The vendor account is tied to a limited liability entity. The entity is..." He turned another page. "Mercer Strategy Group, LLC." Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. "Isla." "Yes," Malcolm said. "And if Graham can claim you authorized it, he can frame the transfer as misuse or confusion on your part. It sets you up to look careless even if the money benefited him." Naomi's mouth went dry. "So he can say I did it and then say I stole?" Malcolm's voice lowered. "He can say you are unfit to manage finances. He can argue you should have limited access during divorce proceedings. He can push you into a settlement where he controls the terms." Naomi stared at the paper as if it were a mirror that had lied to her. "And the trust?" she asked. "He can't reach that, right?" Malcolm's hand rested on the trust summary. "He cannot touch the trust assets directly. Your father ensured that. But Graham is not only reaching for money, he's reaching for narrative, because narrative becomes leverage." Naomi exhaled slowly, forcing herself to gather the pieces. "So how do we stop him?" Malcolm leaned in slightly, the air shifting with urgency. "We move first," he said. He opened a final folder and placed 3 items in front of her, like steps carved into stone. "Step 1, Malcolm said, you retain counsel today. A divorce filing with allegations demands immediate legal response. Your attorney will file an answer that denies the claims and requests financial restraining orders to prevent any further manipulation." Naomi nodded once. "Step 2, Malcolm continued, we initiate a forensic audit voluntarily. It sounds counterintuitive, but it is power. We request account statements, vendor histories, email authorizations. We create an evidence trail before he can tidy it." Naomi's eyes hardened. "And step 3? Malcolm slid the 2 keys across the table, aligning them with the steps like punctuation. "Step 3, he said, we open the safe deposit box in the private vault. Your father anticipated exactly this kind of attack. I do not know every detail of what's inside, but I know enough to be certain it is structured to protect you." Naomi looked at the keys. In her mind, she saw her father at work, quiet, invisible to the world, but building something behind the scenes with the patience of someone who understood time better than anger. She saw the way he always locked the door at night, even in a safe neighborhood. The way he taught her to keep copies of important papers. The way he'd said, once, while washing dishes, "Don't ever let anyone rush you into signing away your piece." She hadn't understood then. She understood now. Naomi swallowed, her voice steadying. "If we move first, what happens to Graham?" Malcolm's gaze held hers, firm and unromantic. "Then he loses the ability to define you. He loses the advantage of surprise. He loses the comfort of thinking you will fold." "And the accusations?" Naomi asked. "Will the court believe him?" "The court believes evidence," Malcolm said, "and evidence is what we are going to gather." Naomi's hand drifted to her belly again, a protective instinct she could not stop. "I'm tired," she admitted, the truth sharp with vulnerability. "I'm grieving. I'm pregnant. You don't have to be strong the way people demand," Malcolm said quietly. "You only have to be clear. You only have to take the first steps. After that, the structure carries you." Naomi stared at the papers, at the keys, at the careful architecture her father had left behind, like a bridge built in advance of the flood. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires whispering over damp pavement. The world continued to move, indifferent as ever. But Naomi's interior world had changed. The threat was no longer a storm without shelter. It was a storm she could measure. She took a deep breath, then reached across the table and closed her fingers around the keys. The brass one was cool and worn. The modern one was smooth, unyielding. 2 keys, 2 choices. She did not look away. "Tell me what to do first," Naomi said. Malcolm's voice softened, but it carried steel beneath it. "First," he said, "we stop treating his paperwork like fate. We treat it like what it is." He tapped the divorce complaint once. "A move," he said, "and now we make ours." Naomi did not sleep that night in the way she used to. She slept like someone on watch, drifting for minutes, waking with her heart already running, as if her body had accepted that safety was no longer a default. When morning came, she rose before the sun and moved through the house with quiet purpose, the way her father used to move through dark hallways at midnight, careful, unhurried, fully awake. She made one list on a legal pad and kept it brutally simple. Lawyer, audit, protect the baby, do not speak to Graham. The last line was underlined twice. By 8:30 a.m., she and Malcolm Voss were in a downtown office that smelled like lemon polish and printer ink, an environment built for decisions that would outlive emotions. Naomi wore a cream blouse and a dark coat, her hair pulled back with the restraint of someone refusing to look like a headline. The receptionist led them into a conference room where the walls held framed diplomas and the air held silence that felt expensive. Alicia Grant arrived without drama. Black American, mid-40s, tailored navy suit, eyes sharp enough to cut through sentiment. Her handshake was firm, not performative. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had watched powerful men lie and had learned to recognize the moment before they tried. "I read the complaint," Alicia said, taking her seat. "It's a strategy document, not a truth document." Naomi's fingers tightened together under the table. "He's calling me a thief." "He's calling you controllable," Alicia corrected gently. "There's a difference, and we're going to answer it with procedure." Darren Cho joined moments later, slim, quiet, glasses, a forensic CPA with a laptop that looked like it had lived through battles. He nodded once, opened a folder, and began speaking as if he were laying down rails for a train that could not derail. "First," Darren said, "we secure the landscape. Before we prove anything, we prevent new damage." Alicia slid a draft motion toward Naomi. The top line made Naomi's throat tighten. "Emergency motion for financial restraining order." "This stops him," Alicia said, "from draining accounts, moving assets, reclassifying expenses, or hiding money behind vendors while the divorce is pending." Naomi stared at the paragraphs, Clean, legal language built like a fence. Can the court do that quickly? If we show urgency and credible risk, Alicia said. And his timeline already does that. Serving you days after the funeral, remarrying within the week. Those choices don't read like stability. They read like a rush to control. Naomi felt something inside her unclench. Not relief, but the first hint of footing. Alicia placed another page beside it. Notice of preservation of evidence. This is the one that matters if he thinks he can tidy his story, Alicia said. He cannot delete emails. He cannot destroy records. He cannot lose devices. Once this hits his counsel, every missing file becomes a question with teeth. Naomi's mind flashed to Graham's clean hands, his clean suits, his obsession with appearing unblemished. The thought of him being forced to preserve the mess he created felt like a small, private justice. Darren turned his screen toward her. Now the audit, he said quietly. We are not waiting for him to accuse you louder. We initiated ourselves. Naomi swallowed. Won't that make me look guilty? Like I'm scrambling? Darren's tone remained even. Voluntary audits signal confidence. Guilty people avoid light. We invite it. Malcolm placed the keys on the table between them, the brass one catching a slice of morning sun. Naomi didn't touch them yet. She watched them the way a person watches a door they have never opened, aware of both promise and consequence. Darren continued. We start with 3 categories: bank statements, vendor payments, and authorization trails. We map every transfer. We tag every invoice. We pull metadata on emails. We build a timeline that does not depend on anyone's feelings. Alicia nodded. And while Darren does that, I file your response in counter request. We deny the allegations. We demand disclosures. We request temporary support and medical coverage given your pregnancy. We ask for boundaries, no direct contact except through counsel. Naomi's voice came out smaller than she intended. He'll hate that. Alicia's gaze held hers. He's not your husband in this process. He's your opposing party. The sentence landed like a door closing. Final. Necessary. Naomi drew a slow breath. Somewhere deep beneath her ribs, grief flickered. Not for Graham exactly, but for the woman she had been when she still believed love was protection. What about custody? Naomi asked. The question felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a language she hadn't studied. He can't. He shouldn't. He will try, Alicia said simply. Not because he wants to be a father, but because he wants leverage. So we build a record now, your stability, your care, your medical appointments, your home environment. Every responsible choice you make becomes evidence. Naomi's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. The baby turned, a soft press against her palm, as if reminding her, I'm here. Don't let them write me into their game. Darren clicked into a spreadsheet and began listing the requests they would issue that afternoon. Banks, credit card companies, payroll systems, vendor portals. It was thorough and unglamorous, the opposite of the kind of clapback the world loved. But Naomi felt the strength in it. This was not theater. This was infrastructure. When the meeting ended, Alicia walked Naomi to the door. One more thing, Alicia said softly, lowering her voice the way people do when they're about to tell you what will hurt but save you. You cannot speak to him. No texts, no calls, not even to demand an explanation. He wants you emotional. He wants you reactive. He wants you on record saying something he can twist. Naomi nodded once, swallowing the ache that rose in her throat. What if he comes here? Then you don't open the door, Alicia said, and you call me. Outside, the city was bright again. Blue sky, tourists, horse-drawn carriages clopping down streets built for a past that never apologized. Naomi stood on the sidewalk with Malcolm beside her and felt a strange, clean quiet settle over her. Not peace, not yet, but direction. Back home, she did what Alicia had told her to do. She gathered every document she could find, tax returns, bank statements, mortgage papers, insurance forms, email printouts. She labeled folders. She photographed envelopes. She wrote dates in the margins like a woman collecting proof of her own reality. She didn't cry until she found the page Graham had asked her to sign. Routine housekeeping, he'd called it. Her signature sat at the bottom like an innocent mistake. Naomi stared at it for a long time. Then she placed it in a folder marked Authorizations and slid it into a box with the others. That was the difference now. Before, she would have crumpled it, or hidden it, or blamed herself so thoroughly she forgot to blame the man who handed it to her. Now she filed it. Because filing meant she was no longer bleeding in private. She was building a case. When the sun began to set, Malcolm returned with a courier receipt in his hand. "They've been served," he said quietly. Naomi didn't ask who. She knew. Alicia's motions, Darren's requests, the preservation notice, the emergency filing, pieces moving into place, silent, decisive. Somewhere across town, Graham Whitaker would receive an email with legal language that would feel like a hand closing around his wrist. Do not delete, do not transfer, do not contact, preserve, disclose. Naomi stood in her kitchen, surrounded by folders and the faint scent of lilies finally fading, and felt something unfamiliar settle into her spine. She wasn't answering him with rage. She was answering him with record. And record, she understood now, was how you took a man's story away from him before he could use it to bury you. The first crack did not arrive with a dramatic confession. It arrived the way rot does, quietly, in numbers that didn't belong where they were placed. By midweek, Naomi's dining table had become a command center. Folders stood upright like thin buildings. Sticky notes marked dates. A legal pad held columns of handwriting in her careful script. Because grief had taught her one thing she refused to forget now. Memory could be weaponized against you if you didn't anchor it to paper. Darren Cho worked mostly at night, when banks released full statement batches and vendor portals updated their records. He called Naomi in the mornings with a voice that was always calm, always factual, like he believed emotion would only blur the edges of what mattered. On Wednesday at 7:18 a.m., he said, "I think we found your husband's mistake." Naomi was standing at the sink, rinsing a bowl she hadn't used. The house was too quiet at that hour. Even the refrigerator hum sounded loud. "What kind of mistake?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "The kind people make when they're used to never being questioned," Darren replied. He hid, but he didn't hide well. An hour later, Naomi sat in Darren's office, watching numbers populate across his screen like a language she had to learn quickly or lose her life to. The spreadsheet was clean, rows, categories, timestamps, but beneath its order was something ugly: intention. Darren highlighted a series of transactions. "These," he said, "are payments made from a joint account. They're labeled as vendor expenses, strategic consulting, communications support, brand alignment." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Those are Isla's words." Darren nodded once. "The vendor is an LLC, Mercer Strategy Group. It was created recently. The invoices are new, but the payment pattern is not." He clicked another tab. A chart appeared, months laid out like a timeline. The first payment was small, almost polite. Then another, then a larger one, then a string of them, steady, increasing, confident. Naomi stared. He was paying her while he was still sleeping in this house? "Yes," Darren said, not cruelly, long before the divorce filing. Naomi felt her throat tighten, grief mixing with something sharper. She thought of the nights Graham came home late and blamed investor dinners. She thought of the way he sometimes smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his. She thought of the casual dismissals when she asked, gently, if he was okay. He hadn't been okay. He'd been busy, Darren continued. Now look at the narrative he filed in court. He claims you misused marital funds. But these vendor payments, these are the clearest misuse we've seen so far. And they benefit him, not you. Naomi pressed a palm to the edge of the desk. Her skin felt cold. But he'll say I authorized it. Darren's gaze flicked toward her, steady. That's the next crack. He pulled up an email chain. On the screen was a short message sent from Graham's work account to a finance assistant, with Naomi's name in the body like an excuse. Naomi approved the consultant's support. Please process. Attached, a PDF authorization bearing Naomi's signature. Naomi's stomach dropped, but Darren didn't let the moment swell into panic. He pointed to the metadata panel on the side. The PDF was created, he said quietly, on a machine registered to Graham's office. Not your home printer, not your device. Naomi blinked. What does that mean? It means the document was generated in his environment, Darren said. And your signature, while it resembles yours, doesn't behave like a natural signature when we zoom in. The pen pressure is uniform. The curves are too consistent. We can't call it a forgery yet without an expert, but we can call it suspicious. Naomi's breath caught. The room tilted slightly, like her body was trying to decide whether it was safer to faint or fight. Then why does it look like mine? She whispered. Because he likely used a scanned signature from something you actually signed, Darren said, voice measured. People do that when they assume no one will look closely. Naomi's mind flashed to routine forms. School paperwork, doctor forms, mortgage documents. Her signature lived everywhere, like a piece of her identity Graham could cut out and paste wherever he needed. Darren opened a second folder, credit card statements. Now, he said, here's where his speeches come in. Naomi looked up. Speeches? Darren tilted his head toward another window on his monitor. A video paused on a frame. Graham at a podium, smiling, a clean Tomorrow Summit banner behind him. His suit was sharp. His expression was sincere in the way some men could be sincere on command. You said he's a CFO in clean energy, Darren noted. He's been publicly speaking about ethics, transparency, corporate responsibility. Naomi swallowed. She remembered seeing him in those clips. The way donors praised him afterward. She remembered feeling proud once. Darren unpaused the clip. Graham's voice filled the office, smooth and practiced. Because integrity is not a brand, it's the backbone of trust. Darren muted it and slid a new line item into view. A charge from an upscale jewelry boutique, another from a private marina, another from a luxury hotel in Savannah, months before Savannah had ever entered Naomi's story. These expenses, Darren said, are on the corporate card. Naomi stared. He used company money. Not only that, Darren replied, he labeled some of these as client development, others as travel, but the locations match Isla's social posts. Same weekends, same hotels, same restaurants. Naomi's face went still, the way it does when you've reached the end of disbelief and entered certainty. She could almost see the pattern now, how Graham had built two lives side by side, one for appearances, one for appetite. Darren clicked again and pulled up a bank transfer Naomi recognized. The one Graham had persuaded her to sign for housekeeping. The transfer you authorized, Darren said, was routed through a vendor gateway and landed in a holding account before reaching Mercer Strategy Group. That's a layering technique. It's used to make the path harder to trace. Naomi's hands curled into fists under the table. So he made it look complex on purpose. Yes, Darren said, because complexity buys time, and time buys leverage. There was a pause. Darren's eyes remained on the screen, but his voice softened slightly as he added, Naomi, if he had simply filed for divorce, this would have been painful, but survivable. The accusations change everything. They suggest intent. Naomi's stomach tightened. Intent to destroy me. Darren didn't contradict her. He simply opened one more tab. A list of messages obtained through account backups in shared cloud storage. Small, partial fragments, but enough to show the shape of a conversation. One line stood out. Sent from Graham to an unknown number. Once she signs, she can't prove anything. After that, it's clean. Naomi stared at the sentence until it became a bruise on her vision. Clean, that was what he called it. Clean. Like a floor after someone else scrubs the stains. Like a conscience after someone else takes the fall. Naomi's lungs felt tight, but her voice did not shake when she spoke. "So what do we do with this?" she asked. Darren closed his laptop slightly, forcing her to look at him instead of the numbers. "We document it. We preserve it. We prepare expert verification, and we time it." "Time it for what?" Naomi asked. Darren's expression held no excitement, only strategy. "For the moment when his power depends on the room believing him." Naomi thought of Charleston's society pages, of boardrooms, of donors and cameras and stages. She thought of Graham's face at the funeral, how he had stood beside her like a stranger performing decency. She realized the first crack wasn't only financial, it was moral. Because a man who preached integrity while hiding transactions was not merely unfaithful. He was unstable in a way that mattered. Darren slid a printed packet across the table, neat and labeled. "Take this to Alicia," he said. "This is your foundation. And Naomi, don't speak to him, not even if he begs." Naomi stood slowly, feeling the weight of pregnancy, grief, and newly visible betrayal all at once. But beneath the heaviness was something surprising. Clarity. The receipts didn't match his speeches. And for the first time since the week began, Naomi could see exactly where the truth would break through, if she held it steady long enough. She gathered the packet, pressed it against her chest like armor, and walked out into the bright, indifferent day with a mind that no longer belonged to surprise. The courthouse smelled like paper and stale air, an old building trying to hold too many endings at once. Naomi arrived early, not because she wanted to be there, but because she refused to be rushed. Charleston's family court did not feel like justice. It felt like procedure with fluorescent lighting. People sat shoulder to shoulder on narrow benches, clutching folders and tissues, watching the doors as if their names might be called like a sentence. Alicia Grant had told Naomi to let the system speak for her. "Don't give him emotion," Alicia had said. "Give him record." So Naomi wore nothing dramatic. A soft gray dress that fell cleanly over her pregnant belly. Flats. A single ring she'd kept because it belonged to her life, not to him. Her hair was pulled back with careful restraint. If the building wanted her to look like a woman unraveling, it would not get the satisfaction. She carried one folder, thin, neat, labeled. Inside were not accusations, not speeches, not rage, just dates, transfers, vendor names, an outline of a truth that did not need volume to be sharp. Alicia met her at the entrance, eyes scanning the hallway the way experienced attorneys do, checking exits, watching faces, measuring risk. "We're here for temporary orders," she murmured. "He will try to provoke you. He will try to bait you into saying something careless." Naomi nodded. "I won't." The words felt like a vow she could keep. They sat together near the wall. Naomi watched the clock. She watched a clerk move papers across a counter like this was routine, like other people's lives were simply items to be filed and shelved. Her hands rested on her belly, not protective so much as grounding, reminding herself she was not alone in her body. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first, the way conversations quiet when someone enters who believes they own the space. Naomi felt it before she saw him. A shift in the hallway, a tightening in her chest, the instinctive sense that a familiar threat had returned. Graham Whitaker appeared at the end of the corridor. He wore a tailored navy suit in the expression of a man who expected to be accommodated. His hair was perfectly set. His jaw looked freshly shaved. The same face that smiled at donor dinners and delivered polished speeches about values now carried an almost bored confidence, like he was showing up to finalize paperwork, not dismantle a family. Beside him walked Isla Mercer. She was dressed in cream, pearls at her throat, lipstick carefully chosen to look soft. Her hand rested lightly on Graham's forearm with practiced possession, as if touching him in public made her legitimate. She looked around the hallway with the curiosity of someone entering a museum, interested, entertained, untouched by the pain inside the walls. Naomi's stomach tightened. Alicia leaned closer. "Do not look at her," she whispered. "Keep your eyes on what matters." But it was impossible not to see them. because they wanted to be seen. Graham's gaze found Naomi and held for a beat too long. His mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, something colder. Then he approached. "Naomi," he said, voice low and smooth, as if they were meeting for coffee. "You look, well." The insult was in the gentleness, as if he was surprised she hadn't collapsed, as if her composure disappointed him. Naomi didn't answer. She looked at him without softness, without hostility, just a steady absence of permission. Isla tilted her head, eyes flicking to Naomi's belly with the faintest trace of discomfort, then back to Naomi's face. "Hi," she said sweetly, like this was normal, like she was introducing herself at a neighborhood brunch instead of standing beside the man who had just tried to bury Naomi with allegations. Alicia stood. "Mr. Whitaker," she said evenly, "any communication goes through counsel." Graham's eyes moved to Alicia, calculating. "Of course, I respect the process," he replied, the way someone says they respect traffic laws while speeding. Then he did something small and deliberate. He stepped half a pace closer to Naomi, just outside Alicia's reach, and lowered his voice. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. Alicia's tone sharpened. "No." But Naomi, to her own surprise, heard herself say, "Yes." Alicia turned, eyes warning. Naomi met her gaze and gave a subtle shake of her head. Not reckless, intentional. Alicia hesitated, then nodded once, the way good counsel does when she recognizes her client is choosing strategy, not emotion. They walked a few steps down the hallway, just far enough that the words would not carry, but close enough that cameras from phones could still catch silhouettes if anyone tried. Naomi felt Isla's eyes on her back like perfume, sweet, suffocating, unnecessary. Graham folded his hands loosely, as if he were about to offer her a deal. "I didn't want it to go like this," he began. Naomi stared at him. "Then why did you make it go like this?" A flicker passed through his face. Annoyance, quickly masked. "It's complicated. You know how things get. Your father's death, the accounts. I needed to protect myself." "From what?" Naomi asked, voice quiet. He exhaled like she was being difficult. "There were transfers, questionable ones. My attorneys advised me to move quickly." Naomi didn't blink. "My attorneys advised me to move carefully." He smiled faintly. "Naomi, listen. We can end this cleanly if you cooperate. You don't want this getting messy." The word cleanly hit her like a bell. Darren's discovery, the text fragment. Once she signs, after that it's clean. Naomi felt her heartbeat steady rather than race. Something in her settled into place, cold and clear. "You filed allegations," she said. "You didn't just file for divorce. You called me a suspect." Graham's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. Then he shrugged, almost bored. "It's standard language." "It's not," Naomi replied. "And you know it's not." His voice dropped, sharpening. "Do you want to do this in court? Do you want people asking questions about your father and his money? About what you knew and when?" Naomi's stomach tightened, but her face stayed calm. She could feel Alicia watching from a distance. She could feel the building listening, the way institutions always did, waiting for someone to break. Naomi took a slow breath. "Say it to my face," she said. Graham paused. "Say what?" "The truth," Naomi said softly. "Why now? Why this week? Why the accusations?" For a moment, something like irritation flashed in his eyes. Then something like confidence. He leaned in slightly, as if he could still control the intimacy of the moment. "You don't even know what your father left," he murmured. The sentence was quiet, almost tender. That was the cruelty of it. He said it the way a man says, "You don't know how the world works." As if her ignorance was proof she deserved what was happening to her. Naomi held his gaze. "And you do?" His mouth tightened. "Enough. Enough." A word that admitted everything without confessing. Enough to plan. Enough to move fast. Enough to assume she was powerless. Naomi nodded slowly, as if she were receiving a piece of information she could file. Behind Graham, Isla shifted. Naomi saw her expression tighten, just for an instant, like even she was startled by how much he'd revealed. Naomi kept her voice low. You remarried. Graham's jaw flexed. That's not relevant. It's relevant to character, Naomi said, softly. Relevant to timing. Relevant to your standard language. His eyes narrowed. Don't do this. You're emotional. Naomi felt a small, almost sad clarity. He still wanted to place her inside a stereotype. Pregnant, grieving, unstable, so he could dismiss her without hearing her. She tilted her head slightly. If I were emotional, Graham, I would be screaming. His expression flickered again. Uncertainty quickly covered. We can settle, he insisted. Quickly, privately. You keep the house. I pay support. You walk away. That's reasonable. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She thought of the funeral, the whisper in her ear. We'll talk Monday. She thought of the papers served like a blade. She thought of the vendor payments, the layered transfers, the manufactured signature, and she thought of her father's photograph in her hallway, Leonard Reed's calm eyes, the quiet strength behind them. Naomi's voice remained gentle. I'm not walking away. Graham's face tightened. Naomi, no, she interrupted, still soft. You wanted speed because you thought I would panic. You thought I'd sign just to make the pain stop. His nostrils flared slightly. You don't want to fight me. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. I'm not fighting you, she said. I'm documenting you. The words landed heavier than any insult. Graham went still. For the first time, Naomi saw something in his eyes that wasn't confidence. Calculation, reassessment. He glanced past her, toward Alicia, as if remembering she existed. As if remembering that systems could be turned against him too. A clerk's voice called a name down the hallway. Doors opened and closed. Other people's lives moved forward in small, official steps. Naomi stepped back, ending the proximity he had tried to claim. We're done talking, she said. Graham's voice sharpened as she turned. This doesn't have to be ugly. Naomi looked over her shoulder once, her expression composed. Then you shouldn't have tried to make me the villain, she replied. She walked back to Alicia, with her spine straight, her breathing even, her hands steady on her folder. Alicia's eyes searched her face. Naomi said nothing, because she didn't need to. She had gotten what she came for. Not an apology, a slip. One sentence that would matter later, when Graham stood in a room full of people and tried to pretend he had never known anything about Leonard Reed's legacy. And as Naomi took her seat beside her attorney, she felt the strangest thing settle into her chest. Not satisfaction, not triumph, certainty, because now she understood what Graham truly feared. It wasn't losing her, it was losing control of the story. Savannah welcomed people the way Charleston did, through beauty that looked effortless and rules that were anything but. The city wore its history in soft colors, moss-draped oaks, brick walkways warmed by afternoon sun, wrought iron balconies that made even ordinary conversations feel like they belonged to a story. Everything was curated. Everything was watched. In Savannah, reputation was not a detail. It was currency. Naomi arrived 2 hours before the summit doors opened, not because she was nervous, because she refused to enter a room where men like Graham believed she should be late, flustered, grateful for a chair at the edge. She checked in quietly at the restored hotel, once a grand rail station, now a gleaming monument to wealth and taste, and followed Malcolm Voss through corridors lined with framed black and white photographs of old galas, old names, old power. Her heels clicked softly across marble. She could feel her pregnancy in the gentle weight of her belly, a constant presence that made every step deliberate. The baby was calm that day, as if even this new life understood. We are not here to tremble. Malcolm guided her into a private lounge on the mezzanine level, a room with high windows and muted light, where staff moved like trained shadows. On the table sat a small stack of folders, each sealed and labeled. Beside them lay a printed program for the evening. At the center of the program, in elegant script, was the title, The Horizon Initiative Summit, a night of integrity and impact. Naomi's eyes moved down the list of honorees, and there it was, exactly as Darren had predicted, exactly as Malcolm had warned. Graham Whitaker, honoree, Corporate Stewardship Award. Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose. Even the universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Integrity, impact, stewardship. Words Graham could wear like a suit. Malcolm studied her face. "Are you ready?" he asked. Naomi's voice was quiet. "I've been ready since the moment he tried to make me a suspect." Malcolm nodded once, then turned to the folders. "These are for the board," he said. "These are for compliance." He pointed to a third stack. "And these are for the sponsor council. Timed for delivery when I give the signal." Naomi looked at the seals, at the neatness of the preparation. Her father's influence was in the details. Quiet, thorough, almost tender in its insistence on structure. Leonard Reed had always believed in doing things the right way, not the loud way. Naomi felt him in the architecture of this counterstrike. A door opened behind them. Alicia Grant stepped in, composed as ever, followed by Darren Cho with his laptop case and a face that looked like he hadn't slept. They weren't dressed for spectacle. They were dressed for a system. Alicia touched Naomi's shoulder lightly. "We're not making accusations tonight," she murmured. "We're making a record in the presence of witnesses." Naomi nodded. "Understood." Darren opened his laptop and checked the time. "The first wave of emails is queued," he said. "Second wave is ready, pending your signal." Naomi stared out the window at Savannah Square below, where tourists drifted in small groups under mossy trees. Life moving, unaware. She thought of how men like Graham counted on that, on the world's indifference, on the way attention moved on quickly, on how easily a woman could be labeled and forgotten. Tonight would not allow forgetting. At 6:45 p.m., the summit began to fill. The ballroom downstairs glowed with amber lighting and chandeliers that made every glass sparkle. Waiters glided between clusters of guests carrying trays of champagne. People spoke in measured tones, laughter carefully placed, like everyone understood the room had rules, even if no one said them aloud. Naomi watched from the mezzanine railing for a moment before descending. From above, the guests looked like an orchestrated pattern. Dark suits, jewel-toned gowns, controlled smiles. She recognized the type. Board members, donors, local politicians, executives who specialized in appearing moral while making decisions that weren't. And then she saw him. Graham entered exactly on time, as if punctuality was proof of virtue. His posture was straight, his smile easy, his confidence intact. On his arm, Isla Mercer moved like she belonged there. Chin lifted, eyes bright, dress chosen to catch light with every step. She looked like an announcement, like a victory. Graham paused near the entrance, greeting someone Naomi didn't know with a handshake that lasted just long enough to signal familiarity. He laughed at a joke. He nodded as if he were listening deeply. He scanned the room, not for Naomi, but for status. Isla leaned close to him, whispering something. He smiled in a way that suggested reassurance. Naomi felt the old instinct rise, the instinct to shrink, to disappear, to protect herself from the humiliation of being seen as the discarded wife. But she did not shrink. She stepped into the ballroom through a side corridor, not as a spectacle, not with dramatic entrance music, but with the calm of someone who had already done the hardest part in private. She wore a black gown that fell simply over her body, elegant without begging for attention. Her hair was smoothed back, her face minimal in makeup. No performance, no pleading, just presence. The baby shifted once, as if to remind her, stand. Alicia stayed close but slightly behind, the way protection should be, present, not overpowering. Darren drifted toward a service corridor where a staff member waited with an earpiece, ready to coordinate timing. Malcolm moved through the room with quiet authority, greeting donors and board members like someone who had never needed to announce his power to be felt. Graham did not see Naomi at first. He was too busy being the man he believed the room required. Charming, impressive, harmless. He was too busy collecting admiration like oxygen. Then Isla noticed. Naomi saw it in the smallest change. Isla's smile tightening, her gaze snagging on Naomi's figure across the room. Isla leaned toward Graham, her lips moving quickly. Graham turned. Their eyes met from a distance, across crystal and polished wood, in the soft hum of conversations. For a fraction of a second, Graham's expression remained smooth, trained. Then something subtle cracked. Not fear exactly. Surprise, as if Naomi's presence here violated the script he'd written for her. As if she was supposed to be at home, crying, signing, dissolving. Graham's jaw flexed once. He recovered quickly, shifting into that public smile again, the one that said, "I'm unbothered." But Naomi had learned to read him now. He was bothered. Isla, sensing it, tightened her grip on his arm. She looked around, searching for context. Who Naomi was here with, why she looked so composed, why she wasn't hiding. Isla's eyes flicked to Malcolm across the room, then to Alicia, then back to Naomi. Isla's smile returned, brighter, sharper, like a woman trying to prove she belonged. Graham began walking, not directly toward Naomi, too obvious, but toward a cluster of board members near the stage, where nameplates sat on reserved tables. Naomi watched him greet them, watched him shake hands, watched him place himself inside a circle of influence the way a man steps into a warm coat. His confidence returned with each nod he received, each laugh offered. Naomi understood then. He believed this event was his safety. He believed the room was his armor, because he didn't know what Naomi knew. He didn't know about the metadata. He didn't know about the vendor layering. He didn't know about the preservation notice already served, about the emergency motions filed, about the forensic analysis in progress. And most dangerously, he didn't know that Malcolm Voss was not a guest. He was the trustee. At 7:30 p.m., a bell chimed softly. The lights dimmed. The MC, a charismatic local philanthropist, welcomed the crowd and spoke about impact, about community, about vision. Naomi took her seat at a table near the front, not in the center, not hidden, visible enough to be counted, calm enough to be misunderstood. Across the room, Graham sat at a reserved table labeled honorees. Isla sat beside him like a polished accessory. She laughed at the right moments. She touched his arm when people approached, as if staking a claim. Naomi watched as Graham accepted compliments, watched him play the role of good man so smoothly the room rewarded him without questioning the foundation. She felt no urge to interrupt. Not yet. Because this was not about humiliating him. It was about letting him walk deeper into the wrong room. When the MC announced, "And now we welcome our trustee and founding partner, Mr. Malcolm Voss," Naomi saw Graham's posture shift slightly. He didn't react like a man hearing a random name. He reacted like a man who recognized power. Malcolm walked onto the stage with the composure of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. The applause that greeted him was real, respectful, familiar. Graham's smile tightened. Isla leaned in, whispering. Graham's eyes narrowed as he watched Malcolm take the microphone. Naomi's heart beat once, slow and heavy, and then steadied. This was the moment where rooms turned, where scripts failed, where men who had relied on charm discovered that systems did not care how likable they were. Graham Whitaker sat in his honoree seat, polished and confident, unaware that the floor beneath him had already been measured, marked, and prepared to shift. He had come to be celebrated. He had walked into the wrong room. The ballroom held its breath the way grand rooms do when power steps to the microphone. Malcolm Voss stood beneath the chandelier light with a calm that felt older than the building, an ease that did not come from charm, but from standing on structure. He adjusted the microphone with the smallest movement, glanced once at the program, and then lifted his eyes to the audience, as if he knew every name in the room and what each name had cost. "Good evening," he began, voice smooth, unhurried. Thank you for being here to celebrate impact that lasts longer than applause. A polite laugh moved through the crowd. Glasses chimed softly. Naomi sat still at her table near the front, hands resting lightly over her belly. She could feel the baby's steady presence like a quiet metronome, life keeping time while the room performed. Across the ballroom, Graham Whitaker sat tall in his honoree seat. His smile was in place. His posture suggested entitlement to recognition. Isla Mercer sat beside him, angled toward the stage with practiced attention, the kind of expression women wear when they understand their role is to look supportive while being seen. Malcolm continued, "Tonight is about stewardship," he said. "Not the kind that makes headlines, the kind that makes foundations." He spoke for a few minutes about the Horizon Initiative, its mission, its grants, its promises. It was the kind of language gala audiences loved. Vision, accountability, community. The room nodded in rhythm, soothed by words they believed were harmless. But Naomi heard the precision beneath the softness. Malcolm was not warming the audience. He was positioning them, placing their minds where he needed them so the truth could land without chaos. He reached the moment he'd been building toward. "As trustee," Malcolm said, "I have the privilege each year of recognizing not only those who contribute publicly, but also those whose contributions are woven into the very existence of this work." The room quieted. Even the waiters paused at the edges. Malcolm's gaze moved across the tables, not searching for Naomi. He already knew exactly where she was, but making the room feel as though something was about to be revealed. "Many of you," he said, "have supported Horizon because you believe in integrity, in transparency, in the kind of impact that doesn't collapse the moment the spotlight turns away." A soft murmur of agreement traveled to the audience. Naomi saw a few board members exchange pleased glances. They liked hearing their values reflected back at them. It made them feel safe. Malcolm smiled faintly. Then he shifted. "Tonight," he said, "I need to acknowledge someone who has been mischaracterized in recent days. Someone who has carried grief privately while the public attempted to write her into a story she did not author." Naomi felt the room's attention tilt. Subtle, curious. She kept her face calm. She had learned not to flinch when people began to look. Malcolm's voice remained controlled, but it carried an edge now, steel wrapped in velvet. "This person did not ask for sympathy," he continued. "She did not ask for spectacle. She asked for quiet, for time, for dignity." Naomi's throat tightened. She didn't move. She didn't bow her head. She allowed the words to exist without performing emotion for them. "And yet," Malcolm said, "dignity is often treated as weakness by those who confuse volume with power." A ripple passed through the ballroom. Some people shifted in their seats, sensing a change in tone without yet understanding what it meant. Malcolm looked down at a single card on the podium, then back up. His gaze landed, unmistakably, on Naomi. "Ms. Naomi Elise Reed," he said clearly. The name cut through the room with a clean finality. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The audience did what audiences always do when surprised. They hesitated, waiting for cues. Naomi felt eyes turn, heads pivot. A wave of attention rolled toward her table. Graham's face changed across the room, not dramatically, not enough for most people to catch, but enough for Naomi. His smile froze, then tightened. His jaw flexed. His eyes sharpened as if he were doing math he hadn't planned for. Isla's posture stiffened beside him, her gaze snapping toward Naomi like a reflex. A flicker of irritation crossed her features, quickly covered by a broader smile, as if she could outshine uncertainty by force. Malcolm's voice continued, steady. "Would you stand, please?" Naomi rose slowly. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. She felt the weight of her pregnancy shift, felt the floor solid beneath her shoes. Alicia's presence at her shoulder was invisible but real, an anchor, a witness. As Naomi stood, the room did what rooms do when confronted with unexpected gravity. It recalibrated. People recognized her now, not as a rumor, not as a caption beneath a photo, but as a person, quiet, composed, impossible to dismiss. Malcolm spoke into the hush. "Ms. Reed is not here as a guest," he said. "She is here in her capacity as successor board chair of the Horizon Initiative, by virtue of the Reed Family Trust." A sound moved through the ballroom, soft, collective, like 1,000 thoughts reordering themselves at once. Trust, board chair, Reed family. These were not words that belonged to the version of Naomi Graham had tried to sell. Malcolm continued, each sentence placed with care. "The late Mr. Leonard Reed served this community for decades in ways most of you never saw. He believed in doing good quietly. He believed in building while the world slept." Naomi felt a familiar ache rise at her father's name, but she held it with the discipline grief had taught her. She refused to break in front of people who might mistake tears for weakness. "Mr. Reed," Malcolm said, "was not only a man of service, he was a man of stewardship. Through a private trust structure, he funded Horizon from its earliest days. His legacy is the scaffolding beneath much of what this initiative has accomplished." The rooms shifted again. Naomi watched faces change, curiosity becoming respect, respect becoming calculation. The people who mattered in rooms like this did not only feel, they assessed. They wanted to know what this meant for them. Malcolm didn't rush. He let it sink. "Ms. Reed," he said, "inherits not merely resources, but responsibility. She is the living continuation of a legacy that was intentionally kept quiet to protect its purpose." Naomi's hands rested lightly at her sides. Her chin was lifted. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She simply stood, an undeniable fact. From her peripheral vision, Naomi saw Graham's shoulders tighten. He leaned toward Isla, whispering something. Isla's smile faltered, then returned too bright, too fast. Naomi recognized the reflex. When a woman feels control slipping, she becomes decorative, louder. Malcolm's gaze moved briefly across the honoree table, then returned to Naomi. "I want to be absolutely clear," he said. "Ms. Reed is not a symbol. She is not a story. She is not a footnote in someone else's narrative." A few donors exchanged glances. A board member lowered her wine glass slowly, as if realizing she'd been drinking too casually for what was becoming something else. Malcolm's voice remained calm, but its meaning was sharp. "She is the chair. She is the beneficiary. And she is the person empowered to protect this foundation's integrity." The word integrity landed differently now. It was no longer a soft gala theme. It was a standard about to be enforced. Naomi felt the room turn, not with melodrama, but with the quiet force of social gravity changing direction. People's attention moved away from the honoree table and toward her, not because she demanded it, because Malcolm had named her in a language this room obeyed. Across the ballroom, Graham tried to maintain his expression, but Naomi could see what no one else could see from a distance. The tiny fissures forming around his mouth, the way his eyes flicked too quickly as if searching for exits. Malcolm addressed Naomi directly now. "Ms. Reed," he said, "thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for showing up in the midst of grief, in the midst of an undeserved public storm. Thank you for being willing to stand where your father stood, quietly, firmly, with your name intact." Naomi felt the baby move inside her, a gentle reminder that she was carrying not only a legacy, but a future. She took a slow breath, letting it steady her voice before she spoke. "Thank you," Naomi said simply into the room's silence. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaking. "For honoring my father." Her words were brief, but they carried weight because they weren't begging for approval. They were acknowledging truth. Malcolm nodded once and returned to the microphone. "Tonight," he said, "we will continue our program. We will honor those who have supported this work." He paused, then added, softly, precisely, "And we will honor the standard this foundation requires from anyone who bears its name." The room understood without being told. Conversations tightened. Smiles became cautious. People began to look at Graham, not with admiration now, but with questions forming behind their eyes. Graham sat very still, as if movement might reveal panic. Isla's hand tightened around his arm. Her gaze darted from Malcolm to Naomi to the board, searching for reassurance and finding none. Naomi remained standing for a moment longer than expected. Not to make a point, simply because she needed a breath before sitting back down into a chair that no longer felt like a place for the small. When she lowered herself to her seat, the room did not relax. It had turned. And everyone, including Graham Whitaker, could feel the new direction of the room's gravity, toward the woman he had tried to erase, now named publicly with power he had not anticipated. He had expected a stage. He had not expected the stage to introduce her first. The applause at Naomi's name was polite, measured, uncertain, caught between respect and the fear of applauding the wrong side too early. That was how rooms like this behaved. They didn't rush to truth. They waited to see who truth belonged to. Naomi let the sound pass over her without absorbing it. Her hands stayed still in her lap. Her face remained composed. She did not soften herself to be palatable, and she did not harden herself to be intimidating. She simply existed in the center of attention with the steadiness of someone who had already survived the worst part alone. Malcolm spoke again briefly, then stepped away from the podium. The MC returned, voice brighter than necessary, trying to restore the evening's original tone. But the ballroom no longer belonged to light celebration. It had shifted into something sharper, expectancy. Naomi felt Alicia's presence at her shoulder, like a silent cue. Darren, somewhere near the service corridor, had his phone angled down, ready. Malcolm's eyes met Naomi's once, steady, confirming. Not asking permission, simply reminding her, "You are protected. Speak cleanly." When the MC announced, "And now, a few words from our chair," the room fell quiet as if the air itself had been trained. Naomi rose again. Her chair made no sound against the floor. She walked toward the stage along a path of polite space, people parting without quite understanding why they obeyed. A donor's wife watched her with narrowed eyes, trying to place her. Principal, nonprofit director, pregnant widow's daughter, inside a category that made sense. But Naomi did not fit the old categories anymore. She could feel it, the way the room's curiosity refused to become certainty. She climbed the steps slowly, mindful of her body. When she reached the podium, she placed both hands lightly on its edges, not gripping, not trembling. She looked out across the ballroom. Faces, names, money, influence. And at the honoree table, Graham Whitaker. He sat upright, jaw set, performing calm with every muscle. Isla's smile was fixed like paint, bright enough to hide the crack beginning to spread beneath it. Naomi did not look at Isla long. She didn't need to. This was not about a rival. It was about a record. Naomi let one breath settle in her chest before she spoke. "Good evening," she began, voice clear, warm without being soft. "Thank you for honoring the Horizon Initiative tonight, and thank you for honoring my father." A small wave of murmured approval moved through the room. People liked when a woman sounded grateful. It made them comfortable. Naomi held their comfort just long enough to place what came next. "I want to say something plainly," she continued. "Not dramatically, not emotionally, plainly." Her gaze moved across the audience, calm as still water. "In the past week, I buried my father. In that same week, I was served divorce papers. And in those papers, I was named as a person of financial concern, someone whose integrity should be questioned." A hush fell. Not even the waitstaff moved. Naomi kept her tone even. "I will not argue character in a room full of strangers. Character doesn't need speeches. It needs evidence." She paused, allowing the word evidence to land. "This is not revenge," Naomi said gently. "This is record." The sentence settled over the ballroom like a hand pressing down on noise. Even people who didn't understand the details understood the difference. Revenge was personal. Record was institutional. Record meant consequences could exist without screaming. Naomi continued, "I am speaking tonight because the Horizon Initiative is built on trust. And trust requires transparency. especially when someone is being publicly celebrated for stewardship. Her eyes flicked toward the banner behind her. Integrity and impact. She did not say Graham's name yet. She didn't need to rush. Systems moved slower than anger, but when they moved, they were difficult to stop. There are 3 facts, Naomi said, that I need this room to understand. She lifted one finger. First, the allegations filed against me are currently under review by counsel and a forensic accountant. I have initiated that review voluntarily. A small stir went through the crowd. Voluntary. Confidence. That language mattered. Naomi lifted a second finger. Second, the transactions that have been described as irregularities are connected to vendor payments that did not benefit me and did not originate from my devices or accounts. The room grew stiller, if that was possible. Naomi could feel people leaning forward without moving their bodies, attention tightening like a drawn thread. Then she raised a third finger. Third, any and all documentation relevant to this matter is being preserved. Requests for disclosure have already been issued. The integrity of this foundation will be protected by procedure, not by rumor. Naomi let her hand lower slowly. She did not point. She did not accuse. She did not display screenshots on a projector like a spectacle. She offered something more dangerous. Calm certainty. Across the room, Graham's smile had become a thin line. Naomi saw it clearly now, his eyes moving too quickly, his fingers tightening around his water glass. Naomi's voice remained gentle as she addressed the purpose of the evening. Tonight is about impact, she said, so I am not here to derail this summit. I am here to ensure the work continues in a way that honors the standards we claim to live by. A few board members nodded, relieved by the professionalism. Naomi understood them. They wanted a bridge back to stability. She was offering it on her terms. She leaned slightly toward the microphone, lowering her voice just a fraction so the room had to listen more closely. If you are a donor, she said, you deserve to know that this foundation will not be used as a stage for anyone attempting to rewrite facts through accusation. The sentence slid under the skin of the room. Heads turned subtly toward the honoree table. Naomi straightened again. I won't speak on private marital pain, she said, but I will speak on public integrity. She let her gaze rest, finally, on Graham. Not with rage, not with pleading, with the calm of someone holding a document flat on a table. Mr. Whitaker, Naomi said, voice still level, is being honored tonight for stewardship. A ripple ran through the audience. Some people inhaled, others froze. Naomi continued, unhurried. And so, it is important to state for the record, any allegations of financial misconduct associated with this initiative, this foundation, or its associated vendors will be reviewed independently and promptly. She did not say, you did it. She did not need to. She was turning the system's attention toward the area where truth lived. Graham's face tightened. Isla's smile faltered so briefly it might have been imagined, then returned with force, brittle and bright. Naomi let the room sit in the discomfort. Then she gave them a path forward. This foundation exists to serve, she said, voice softening with sincerity. My father believed that service should never be loud. He believed it should be consistent, clean, honest. She paused on the word clean, and Naomi saw Graham flinch, just a fractional change, like a nerve touched. Naomi's eyes remained steady. If you are here tonight because you believe in integrity, stay with us. If you are here for appearances, understand that appearances are not the same as standards. The ballroom felt suspended now, a room caught between the old performance and the new reality. People weren't sure how to clap. They weren't sure who they were supposed to be angry at. They were simply listening. Naomi drew in a breath, letting her final words be simple. I appreciate your presence, she said, and I appreciate your patience as the record is completed properly. She stepped back from the microphone with the same composure she had approached it. No flourish, no mic drop, just quiet finality. For a beat, the room stayed silent. Then applause began, hesitant at first, like rain testing a roof. then stronger, as people took cues from board members who understood what had just happened. Naomi had made a legal event out of a social moment. She descended the steps, returning to her seat. As she sat, she felt her pulse steady. She did not feel triumphant. She felt clear. Across the ballroom, Graham did not clap. His hands rested on the table, still. Isla leaned toward him, whispering too fast, her eyes darting across faces that were no longer friendly. And somewhere near the service corridor, Naomi saw Darren glance at his phone, thumb hovering, ready to send the next wave when the signal came. Because Naomi had done what she came to do. She had placed the truth into the room without turning it into theater. She had turned accusation into evidence. And she had said, in the only language power truly respects, this is not revenge. This is record. Applause, when it comes late, has a different sound. It doesn't rise like celebration. It gathers like caution. People clapping because they sense they should, because the room has chosen a direction, and no one wants to be the last person facing the wrong way. Naomi felt it around her as she returned to her table, hands meeting palms, polite smiles tightening, heads nodding as if everyone had always been on the side of integrity. She accepted none of it personally. This was not about being liked. It was about being unmisunderstood. Malcolm sat back down with the ease of a man who had placed the cornerstone exactly where it belonged. Alicia's posture remained relaxed but alert, like a guard who doesn't need to stand in front to be felt. Naomi's water glass trembled faintly when she lifted it, more from adrenaline than fear, then steadied again against her lips. Across the ballroom, Graham Whitaker made himself clap. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man applauds at a funeral, an act of public compliance. Isla clapped more brightly, her smile wide, as if volume could cover doubt. But Naomi saw the truth beneath the performance. Graham's eyes were not on the stage anymore. They were on exits, on faces, on the shifting geometry of influence. He knew something had changed. He didn't yet know how far. The MC stepped forward quickly, voice lifting, trying to steer the night back toward easy gratitude. "What a powerful reminder of why we're here," she said, as if power could be treated like decoration. "Now let's continue celebrating the leaders who make this work possible." Servers began moving again, trays flowing between tables, champagne refilling glasses. Music returned, soft and elegant, as if the evening could simply resume its original script. But scripts don't survive once the audience notices the seams. Naomi watched as a board member at the nearest table leaned toward another and spoke behind a raised hand. She watched a donor's husband check his phone twice in 10 seconds, thumb hovering as if waiting for a message he suspected would come. She watched the sponsor's representative, an older woman in a deep green gown, tilt her head toward the service corridor with the attentive stillness of someone trained to smell risk. Naomi's gaze drifted, intentionally, toward the corridor. Darren stood half hidden near the staff entrance, dressed like he belonged there because he did. His phone was in his hand, screen glowing. He didn't look anxious. He looked ready. Naomi's chest rose with a slow breath. She had promised herself no spectacle, no chaos, no public shouting match with a man who fed on controlling the emotional weather. She had done exactly what she intended. She placed the truth into the room cleanly. Now the system had to do what systems did when they were forced to acknowledge record. Alicia leaned in slightly, her voice nearly silent. "If you want the second wave now, give Malcolm the signal." Naomi glanced at Malcolm. He was watching the ballroom with the calm of a chess player who had already counted the squares. When Naomi met his eyes, he gave the faintest nod, one movement, like a door opening quietly. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. She lifted her water glass again, not to drink, but to set it down with a soft, deliberate tap. A sound small enough to be nothing to anyone else. Malcolm's hand moved once under the table, pressing his phone screen. Across the room, Darren's thumb pressed send. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The MC continued speaking, introducing the next award. Graham adjusted his cufflink, posture tight with forced ease. Isla leaned close to him, whispering something that sounded like reassurance or strategy. Naomi couldn't hear the words, only the urgency. Then the ballroom began to buzz, not with conversation, with phones. It started at the sponsor table. A man in a black tuxedo glanced down, eyes narrowing, then looked up with a face that had changed shape. His wife leaned over, reading. Her lips parted slightly. A second later, two board members near the stage checked their devices almost in unison, like an involuntary reflex. One of them stopped clapping mid-motion, hands frozen together as if the message had glued them. Then a soft vibration traveled through the entire room, notifications arriving table by table, like a wave moving across a shoreline. Naomi felt her own phone buzz in her clutch. She didn't open it. She already knew what it said. She could picture the subject line Darren had read to her earlier, because it was designed to be impossible to ignore. Immediate review required. Vendor payments and authorization irregularities. The sender list was broad and exact. The recipients were carefully chosen. Horizon board members, compliance counsel, sponsor legal teams, and a small handful of investors tied to Graham's company. People whose job titles included words like risk and governance and fiduciary, not gossip, authority. In the corner of her eye, Naomi saw the sponsor's representative rise from her chair and step away from her table, phone pressed to her palm, expression suddenly sharpened into professional alarm. Near this, a server paused mid-step, sensing the room's temperature change without understanding why. The music continued, but it sounded wrong now, like a string quartet playing during a fire drill. Graham felt it before he saw it. Naomi watched his head lift slightly, eyes scanning as if he'd heard a distant alarm. Isla's smile faltered, her gaze darting from face to face. She tightened her grip on his arm again, but her touch looked less like possession now, and more like a woman holding onto a railing in turbulence. Graham reached for his phone. His hand moved with the same calm he used on camera, but it was too fast for true ease. He glanced down and Naomi saw the exact moment the message hit him. Not because he flinched dramatically, but because something in his face went blank, as if the mind had dropped the mask to calculate survival. He read, his eyes moved, his jaw tightened. Then he looked up, straight toward Malcolm, not toward Naomi, because men like Graham understood hierarchy. He understood that what was happening now wasn't a wife's anger, it was a trustee's intervention, a foundation's defense, a compliance event. Isla leaned in, whispering, "What is it?" The brightness in her voice was still trying to pretend. Graham didn't answer immediately. His throat worked once as he swallowed. He angled the phone so Isla could see. Naomi watched Isla's expression change in stages. Confidence, confusion, then something harder. Fear. Her smile fell away as if it had been turned off. She blinked, fast, as though her eyes could reject the words. Around them, people began to do what polite society does when a man's public shine starts to crack. They created distance. A donor who had been leaning toward Graham minutes ago shifted back in his chair. A board member's wife turned her body slightly away, as if to avoid being seen too close. A man from an investment firm excused himself with a tight smile and stepped away from the honoree table without explanation. The MC's voice continued, but it was now background noise. No one was listening. 100 small conversations had started without sound, eyes asking questions, faces answering without words. Graham set his phone down slowly and forced his hands to clap again, as if applause could restore control. But Naomi sat very still. She did not smile. She did not stare. She simply watched the system do what it always did when Record entered the room. It began to rearrange loyalties with quiet speed. Alicia's voice was soft at Naomi's shoulder. Sponsor council is standing. Compliance is moving. That's your second peak. Naomi exhaled slowly. The baby moved inside her, a gentle turn that felt like a private affirmation. You did not scream. You did not beg. You built this. Across the ballroom, Graham leaned toward Isla at last, his voice low, urgent. Isla shook her head once, her eyes wide. Then Graham's gaze lifted again and found Naomi. For the first time all night, he didn't look at her like a problem to manage. He looked at her like a reality he had failed to predict. The room continued to buzz with vibration and whispers, but one truth sat above the noise like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The story was no longer his to direct, because the email had landed while he was still clapping. And now, the applause, like everything else, belonged to the record. The first consequence arrived the way consequences always do for men like Graham Whitaker. Quietly, through systems he once believed existed to serve him. At 8:11 p.m., his corporate card stopped working. It happened without announcement. Isla, still trying to salvage normalcy, had motioned for a refill at the honoree table. One more glass of champagne, one more gesture to prove nothing had changed. The server returned with a practiced smile and a small, handheld reader. Graham handed over the card with the casual confidence of a man who had never watched a transaction fail in public. The reader beeped once, then again. The server's smile tightened, polite but uncertain. "I'm so sorry, sir. It looks like this card is temporarily unavailable." Temporarily unavailable. A phrase designed to be gentle, and yet it landed like a slap because the room heard it. Graham's jaw flexed. He reached for a different card, another attempt at control. The second one processed, but the damage was done. Isla's gaze darted around the tables, checking who had noticed. People had noticed, not because of the champagne, because a man's access, when it falters, becomes a signal. At 8:17 p.m., his phone buzzed again. A new email, this time from his company's legal counsel. The subject line was sterile and lethal. Litigation hold. Preserve all devices and communications. Graham's eyes moved across the screen. The words weren't emotional, and that was what made them frightening. A litigation hold meant the story had left the realm of marital conflict and entered the realm of compliance. It meant every message, every invoice, every attachment could become a question asked under oath. Isla leaned in, whispering, "What does that mean?" Graham's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't want to explain it in a room where sound traveled. He tilted the phone toward her instead. Isla read. Her lips parted. The pearls at her throat suddenly looked less like elegance and more like a collar. At 8:23 p.m., the first cancellation came. Graham had been scheduled to meet an investor the next morning, an early coffee, a quiet conversation in which he would reassure, charm, and tighten the grip he had on other people's money. His phone lit with a message from the investor's office. Given the compliance notice received tonight, tomorrow's meeting is postponed until further review. Postponed until further review. A polite way of saying, we will not be photographed beside you while the floor is shaking. Graham's shoulders stiffened. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but Naomi saw it clearly from across the room. The subtle constriction around his eyes, the small tightening of his fingers against the tablecloth, as if he could hold on to stability by force. At 8:31 p.m., Isla's world began to narrow. Her phone lit up with an email from the summit's sponsor liaison, the very person who'd been praising her brand presence earlier in the evening. We're pausing all vendor engagement tied to Mercer Strategy Group pending review. Please do not submit further invoices. Isla stared at the screen as if it were written in another language. But I didn't, she whispered, more to herself than to Graham. I didn't do anything. Graham leaned toward her, voice low, urgent. Stop talking. It wasn't a comfort. It was a command. At 8:38 p.m., the room changed its body language. A cluster of donors who had been orbiting the honoree table drifted away as if pulled by invisible currents. One man offered Graham a tight smile and stepped back mid-conversation, pretending he'd seen someone across the room. A woman who'd asked for a photo earlier now avoided eye contact completely. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. High society didn't punish loudly. It withdrew warmth until you understood you were alone. At 8:44 p.m., Graham received the call he couldn't ignore. The screen showed HR Director. He hesitated for half a second, then answered, keeping his voice smooth. Hi, Karen. Naomi couldn't hear the words from that distance, but she didn't need to. Graham's face did the translating. His brow tightened. His gaze dropped. His posture changed from honoree to employee. He spoke quietly. I understand. Yes, tonight? And then, as if trying to recover, forced a faint laugh that didn't land. When he ended the call, Isla grabbed his wrist. What did they say? Graham's eyes flashed with something close to panic, quickly masked. We need to leave, he said. At 8:49 p.m., the sponsors' council approached the honoree table. Not alone. 2 staff members flanked her with the gentle firmness of people trained to protect donors from disruption. She leaned toward Graham and spoke in a tone too low for the room to catch. Professional, clipped, final. Graham nodded once, too quickly. Isla's face went pale. The council gestured slightly toward the side corridor, the sponsor lounge, the private area where honorees typically went for photos, handshakes, and quiet congratulations. For a heartbeat, it looked like an invitation. It wasn't. It was a removal. At 8:53 p.m., Graham stood. He tried to do it casually, as if he'd simply remembered another obligation. He adjusted his jacket. He placed a careful smile on his face. He offered a vague nod to the table. But the room had learned a new language tonight. It wasn't listening to his smile. It was watching where he was allowed to go. As Graham walked toward the sponsor lounge, the security detail moved with him. 2 steps behind, not touching him, but guiding the path. And then the smallest, most humiliating thing happened. At the lounge entrance, the staff member at the door glanced at a list, then stepped slightly into Graham's way. I'm sorry, sir, she said quietly. This area is restricted at the moment. Restricted, a word that would have been unthinkable for him an hour ago. Graham's face tightened. I'm the honoree. The staff member's expression didn't change. I understand. I'm sorry. Behind her, Naomi saw the sponsors' council speak to the security team with one subtle movement of her hand, and the security team turned. Not sharply, not publicly, just enough to indicate the direction had changed. Graham was not being escorted in. He was being escorted out. At 9:02 p.m., he passed Naomi's table, not by choice, but because the exit route required it. For a second, their eyes met. Graham's gaze wasn't angry now. Anger required confidence. What Naomi saw instead was something quieter and more revealing. Disbelief mixed with calculation, the frantic mental arithmetic of a man watching doors close in real time. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't offer the satisfaction of reaction. She simply held his gaze with the calm of someone who had learned the difference between noise and consequence. Isla followed behind him, clutching her purse like a life raft, her face stripped of performance. Her eyes flicked toward Naomi once, sharp, wounded, accusing, as if Naomi had broken a fairy tale she'd convinced herself was permanent. But fairy tales don't survive audits. At 9:07 p.m., the ballroom resumed its program as if nothing had happened. The MC introduced the next award. A donor laughed too loudly, eager to prove normalcy. Glasses clinked. The quartet played. And yet, everyone had seen it. Not a shouting match. Not a scandalous scene. Something more devastating. A man losing access, step by step, while the room stayed polite enough to make it feel worse. Naomi sat with her hands folded, feeling the baby move gently beneath her ribs, and understood the true shape of power. It wasn't the ability to humiliate. It was the ability to remove a man's privileges without raising your voice. Isla Mercer had always believed she understood rooms. She understood lighting, angles, the subtle choreography of laughter and proximity. She understood when to touch a man's arm and when to let him reach for her. How to make a relationship look like destiny rather than strategy. She had built a career on the ability to be seen, seen as desirable, seen as important, seen as a woman who belonged wherever the money gathered. Tonight, Savannah had loved her at the door. People had turned their heads when she entered on Graham's arm, admiring the clean line of her dress, the perfect gloss of her hair, the ease of her smile. Women had asked where she'd found her earrings, Men had laughed at her jokes a little too readily. Someone had called her radiant, and she'd accepted the word like a crown. Now, in the corridor outside the ballroom, she stood under softer light and felt the crown slipping. Graham had been redirected away from the sponsor lounge, guided toward the side exit with a calm that left no room for argument. He walked quickly, posture tight, his jaw clenched as if he could grind reality into something manageable. Isla followed half a step behind him, breath shallow, her fingers gripping her purse so hard her knuckles whitened. "Graham," she whispered, trying to keep her voice sweet even as it shook. "What is happening?" He didn't turn. "Not now. Tell me," she insisted, the words sharper than she intended. "They're looking at me like I... He stopped abruptly near a service doorway, turning just enough to silence her with his eyes. "Stop talking," he said again, lower this time, more dangerous. "You're making it worse." Isla's throat tightened. She swallowed and forced a smile that didn't belong on her face anymore. It was the same smile she'd worn on camera, the one that said she was unbothered, untouchable. But she felt bothered. She felt touched by fear, by exposure, by the sudden realization that Graham's power had been her platform, and platforms could collapse. They returned to the ballroom as if leaving would admit defeat. Graham moved back toward the honoree table, attempting to reclaim normalcy through presence. Isla followed, scanning faces for reassurance. And that was when she understood the real punishment of high society. It didn't scream at you. It simply stopped feeding you attention. The first person who refused to see her was a woman Isla had been charming 20 minutes earlier, a donor's wife with a sleek bob and a bright laugh. Isla stepped toward her, ready to reattach herself to warmth. "Darling," Isla said, voice light, "I love your dress." The woman's eyes flicked over Isla's face, then past her shoulder, as if Isla were a coat rack. "Thank you," she said vaguely, already turning to speak to someone else. Isla's smile froze. She waited for the woman to return, to remember, to apologize. She didn't. Isla moved on, still smiling, still performing. She approached a young brand representative she'd met at a previous gala, someone who'd once asked to tag her in photos. "Hey," Isla said, leaning in with intimacy. "I saw the sponsor team looking tense. Are we okay?" The rep's expression tightened, polite but closed. "We're just staying aligned with process," she said carefully. Then, as if remembering a schedule, she stepped away. "Excuse me." Aligned with process. Isla heard it as a door closing. She glanced down at her phone, searching for steadiness in the familiar glow of her social world. 3 notifications appeared within seconds. The first was a text from a friend. "Girl, what is this email about Mercer Strategy Group? Call me." The second was from a brand contact. "We're going to untag you for now, just until things are clarified." The third was worse. A short, cold message from her assistant. "Invoice portal is locked. I can't submit anything." Isla's skin went cold. She looked up and realized people were watching her. Not with admiration now, but with something sharper. A curiosity that wasn't friendly. The kind that wanted to know whether she was stupid or complicit. She found Graham at the honoree table, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the stage as if the program could rescue him. Isla leaned down and whispered, "They're pausing my contracts." Graham's eyes flicked to her, then away. "I said not now." Isla's breath hitched. "But it's my business." Graham's jaw tightened. "Your business is tied to my business," he hissed under his breath. "And you're going to sit down and look calm." Isla straightened slowly, stung not only by the dismissal, but by the truth inside it. Tied. That was what she had been. Not loved. Not chosen for her soul. Tied, like a ribbon on a package he wanted to display. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, and tried to breathe. She tried to wear calm the way she always had, like a dress she'd practiced in. But the room kept turning away. A photographer who'd been circling the honoree table earlier now hovered at a distance, lens angled elsewhere. A donor who'd complimented Isla's smile now spoke to Graham without looking at her. A woman who'd asked for her earrings now stared at her like a cautionary tale. Isla caught her reflection in the polished metal of a champagne bucket. Perfect hair, perfect face, eyes slightly wide. She looked like herself, and yet she could feel the room refusing to recognize her. It wasn't that people suddenly hated her. Hatred would have been attention. This was worse. This was erasure. Isla's gaze drifted across the ballroom until it found Naomi. Naomi sat near the front with her posture calm, her hands resting lightly, her face composed in a way Isla couldn't imitate. Naomi wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to be adored. She wasn't even trying to be forgiven. She was simply unafraid. Isla's stomach twisted. She hated that calm. She hated the way Naomi's steadiness made Isla's charm look cheap. And then Naomi stood, not to speak again, not to make a show. She simply rose and stepped toward the side aisle, where Malcolm and Alicia were speaking quietly to a board member. Isla watched, heart hammering, as Naomi moved with purpose, like the room belonged to her now. A moment later, Naomi turned, and her gaze met Isla's. The look was not cruel. It wasn't triumphant. It was almost clinical, as if Naomi were looking at an object and naming what it was. Isla felt heat rise into her cheeks, defensive words gathering in her throat. Naomi approached the honoree table with calm steps. People nearby stopped talking, sensing friction. Graham's shoulders tightened as he noticed her coming, but he didn't stand. He didn't want a scene. He wanted control. Naomi stopped beside Isla, close enough that only Isla could hear, and spoke softly, almost kindly. "Any invoice you signed," Naomi said, "is now evidence." Isla froze. The words were quiet, but they cut deeper than shouting because they carried the weight of law. Evidence didn't care about her smile. Evidence didn't care about her intentions. Evidence didn't care if she'd believed a man who told her she was safe. Isla's lips parted. "I didn't," she began. Naomi didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She simply added, just as softly, "If you want to be remembered as a professional, you should stop acting like an accessory." Then Naomi looked past her, toward Graham, without a word, and walked away. Isla sat stunned, the air thinning around her. Accessory. The word landed like a verdict, because in that moment, Isla saw the truth she'd avoided. Graham had not married her because she was irreplaceable. He had married her because she was useful, beautiful, strategic, and willing to stand next to him while he rewrote his life. And now, when the room's love turned into distance, he did not reach for her. He did not shield her. He let her take the heat. Isla turned toward Graham, searching his face for reassurance, for partnership, for something that looked like loyalty. He didn't look back. His eyes were fixed ahead, calculating exits, calculating explanations, calculating how to survive. Isla's throat tightened with a sudden, humiliating understanding. The room that loved her hadn't loved her. It had loved the story she represented. New wife, new chapter, glamorous upgrade. And stories like that only stayed valuable as long as they weren't questioned. Now the story was questioned. Now she was not a trophy. She was a risk. Isla swallowed hard and forced her hands to stop trembling. She lifted her chin and tried to reclaim her smile, but her face wouldn't obey. The muscles refused. The performance had lost its power. Around her, the ballroom continued its program: music, laughter, speeches, like an elegant ship trying not to admit it had struck something beneath the waterline. Isla sat in her perfect dress, surrounded by people who had stopped seeing her, and felt the most frightening kind of silence settle in. Not loneliness, exposure. Because when a room stops seeing you, it means it has already decided you're not worth saving. The weeks that followed did not feel like victory. They felt like precision. Naomi learned quickly that power rarely arrives with fireworks. More often it arrives in envelopes, signatures, and calendar entries that turn someone else's confidence into a timeline they can't outrun. Charleston tried to return her to the role it preferred for her: quiet, grateful, embarrassed. But the record had already moved through the right channels. The night in Savannah didn't become gossip, it became compliance. The system had received the evidence, And systems, when properly fed, do not forget. Alicia secured temporary orders with the calm force of a woman who had seen too many mothers punished for being too patient. Naomi's home was protected. Her medical coverage remained intact. Communication was routed through counsel. And the court, faced with a husband who had filed accusations while remarrying at speed, leaned toward caution, toward stability, toward the parent who didn't treat a child like leverage. Darren's audit did what truth often does when it's allowed to breathe. It expanded. Vendor trails clarified, dates aligned. The authorization Graham had waived like proof began to unravel under forensic review. Metadata, routing, device origin, uniform pressure lines. The more he insisted it was standard language, the more the standard exposed him. Graham tried to salvage what he could. He offered settlement generously, then less generously, then in tones that implied Naomi was unreasonable for not accepting his mercy. He sent messages through intermediaries. He hinted at public humiliation, at drawn-out court, at stress for the baby. Naomi did not respond with emotion. She responded with terms, because the most dangerous shift in a woman's life is the moment she stops asking permission to protect herself. On a clean Monday morning, Naomi sat at the long table in Alicia's office, with Malcolm beside her, and a folder in front of her labeled Final Terms. No dramatic music, no trembling hands, just a pen and a steady breath. Alicia read the final points aloud, her voice even. Graham would have no claim on the Reed family trust. He would be bound by non-disparagement and strict communication boundaries. Custody and visitation would follow court-ordered structure, not private negotiation. Any further financial misconduct would trigger immediate review and enforcement. Naomi listened, then added one sentence of her own, soft, simple, irreversible. And he returns my name to me in writing. Alicia paused, then smiled once. We can do that, because it wasn't only about money. It was about identity, about refusing to let a man's narrative stain her legacy. Isla disappeared from the spotlight with the speed of someone who realizes attention can turn poisonous. The brands went quiet. The invitations slowed. Friends stopped tagging. Her new chapter became a blank page she couldn't post her way out of. Graham's world shrank more gradually, door by door, access point by access point. No single moment of collapse for the cameras, just the steady consequence of being audited by reality. And then, on a bright morning near the harbor, Naomi opened the doors to the first Leonard Reed Family Stability Fund, an initiative that provided emergency housing support and school continuity grants for families in crisis. No gilded stage, no champagne, just people who needed something solid, and a woman who had learned how to build it. Naomi stood in front of a simple sign with her father's name and placed one hand over her belly. Her voice didn't shake when she spoke. My father believed dignity should be protected, she said, so that's what we're doing here. That was the ending Graham never predicted. He expected her to beg for fairness. She set terms. And if this story hit a nerve, if you've ever watched someone try to rewrite you, tap like so more women find their footing sooner. Share what you would have told your younger self in the comments, and follow the channel for stories where truth doesn't just survive, it wins on record.